So 2020, our STEAM programs, like I said, we did have over 2,000 students this summer in our week-long summer camps. We actually hit a historic record of students that were able to participate this summer. Due to COVID, a lot of parents wanted their kids in-person learning and engaging. And so we took temperature checks at the door. All the staff wore masks, kids over 10 wore masks, and we had an incredibly successful summer. Those kids were here 8-9 hours a day, 5 days a week. We also in 2020, prior to the closure, were able to host 5,300 students on field trips to the museum for over 95 schools, and that was until we shut down in mid-March. So we were able to reach lots of kids prior to the pandemic. And then parents are really struggling this year, and we were able to give out $30,000 in youth scholarships, actually more than that now, which was a really great way to give back to the community. Here's a couple images of all the fun that kids were having in science camp. We had learners from as young as 3 years old, and as old, I think our oldest one this year was about 15 or 16. Here's a few more pictures. This young lady in the middle was in an all-girls anatomy physiology camp, which was a highly successful full camp sponsored by the Best Buy Foundation to have girls in STEM learning together. After school programs at District 51 are in full swing this fall and last spring until we had to close. But we are in 5 title schools providing after-school education every day after school. It involves exercise. They exercise for an hour playing some kind of physical activity outdoors. They often wear heart monitors, and then they come inside, have a healthy snack, download the data, and they get to observe themselves physically active and do a science experiment before they go home. In 2020, we had a very robust pre-K program. We have our summer camp program for pre-K, but we also have a Little Learners program that meets every Thursday for 3 hours and is still happening. And Science Sprouts. Science Sprouts is a 1-hour program for children and their caregiver. And we used to meet in the museum, and now with COVID, the Sprouts have gone out on the trail. And so they've been meeting around the Grand Valley and have had a really great turnout of families that want to engage and learn while being outside. Our Environmental Institute was in a wonderful program this summer where we could get a lot of kids outdoors and learning resiliency skills. This program is new to the EUREKA, and the Environmental Institute took over 200 kids outdoors across Colorado this summer. And you can see the picture on the bottom. These kids were backpacking into the West Elk Wilderness above Crested Butte for a week. Another kid at the top went rock climbing, learned how to climb and belay her partner down in Unaweep Canyon. So we had a lot of fun. It's a really great program and really important to do during COVID because it's getting kids outside and having that learning time to engage with each other and think through some challenges of the year. EUREKA Exploration started strong. They had an initial trip to the Everglades in February, just prior to COVID hitting the United States. And they went down for a 10-day trip throughout South Florida. And you can see them in the water here on the left-hand picture. And then after we got back, we had the closure. We took a couple months off and then started to put in some regional day trips around Western Colorado. They went up to Glade Park, the Grand Mesa, saw leaves, wildflowers, and we made the most of a bad year and had a wonderful time doing it. Coming in 2021 will be our new outdoor STEAM Playspace and classroom. There's a few images over here on the right-hand side where you can see all of the engaging elements that we're wishing to put into this Playspace. And really great funding was provided by GOCO, the Colorado Health Foundation, the Gates Family Foundation, and American Dermatology, providing sunshades over the top of our play space. So we're excited for that. We hope you all come see us and check it out next year. The museum, the Poor Museum has been not having as many visitors as we normally have. prior to the closure, and including some data from last year, we had our 14,000 visitors. This year was much slower. We were closed for a while, and then due to the county restrictions limiting the number of guests, and people just aren't as willing to get their families out doing hands-on science during a COVID pandemic. But we were able to put in some new exhibits this year. We have a light table exhibit, Went Scope, which is this really beautiful microscope that kids of all ages can learn on, and a bicycle generator where kids can learn about their own energy generation. And that brings us to our wonderful volunteers who keep this museum up and running even when they can't be here. And so we want to spend just a couple minutes honoring them and thanking them for their time. So I'm going to turn this presentation over to Bee Board. She's our volunteer coordinator here at the museum.
Hi there. I'm so glad that all of you have tuned in, and we are so thankful for our volunteers. I have the privilege of working closely with them, and even in a pandemic, we've had over 50 volunteers give almost 2,000 hours. So some of this is creative, working at home or coming in when the museum's closed, and we just really appreciate everyone's efforts. We have a few pictures of this year and last year when we had docents in, like Kathann leading the pre-K, or Jack Greenhill and young John at the hydrology, and then also Keith and Claudette helping students learn about acceleration. And more docents, Jolly with the snake, Eric showing some chemistry to a young student, and Niall packing lots of boxes for School District 51 for their science kits. On a normal year, our fundraiser, when it's in person, sometimes we have RSVP volunteers come. There was a year that we made a lot of airplanes, and so we appreciate their efforts as well. Larry Anna even got into helping with the hydrology, and Jacob's holding the bearded dragon. And then you can see also a lot of the behind the scenes maintenance work, like Mick and David, Clark and Bob, all helping to install, fix, or build new exhibits. And there's also a new volunteer opportunity. So you can join us Friday mornings at the lunch loops to help restore along the new paved path there. And we're also having a volunteer event Sunday, November 1st from 12 to 2. So in case you want some action outside, that's an option as well. And then every year we honor some volunteers with the McConnell Award. So John and Aubrey gave so much of their time to volunteering and helping students learn about math and science, not only in the museum, but also on the road, and spent countless hours helping students. So in honor of them, we've given this award to Alan Conrad, who has been involved with the museum for over 20 years, even gave a Science Sparks presentation online. You can watch it on YouTube. Thanks, Alan. In 2018, it was Walt, Jack, and Mary, who have all been weekly docents for 20 years. And we miss seeing them every week right now during COVID, but we're going to be looking forward to when we can welcome them back weekly. And then last year to Sally, Karen, and Niall. Sally and Karen run our gift shop, and Niall organizes the basement as well as fixes exhibits. We are so thankful for all of their efforts. And now this year, for the 2020 McConnell Award, goes to two very special volunteers, Jim and Mo. Jim and Mo are kind of a package deal. They usually come in together. They both started volunteering in 2008. And they have some memories of their favorite things that they've worked on. Jim's was a virtual 3D image, an inverted and truncated pyramid, and Mo's favorite was an electrostatic wheel. They both say one of the things that they've enjoyed about volunteering is how much they've learned doing all of these activities. And Jim has officially retired, and Mo's thinking that maybe he'll come back and help in a docent capacity. So we wish Jim and Mo that we could hand these flowers to you in person, but we'll see you soon. And just thank you to all of our volunteers. We couldn't do it without you. And back to Jen.
So 2020 had many successes and its challenges, but was it apocalyptic? I'm going to turn this presentation over to our experts over at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, where we can all be engaged in a really exciting discovery that they had down here locally in Colorado Springs. All right, Dr. Miller, Dr. Lyson, it's your presentation.
All right, thank you. We're so excited to be here. We're gonna tag team this presentation, and I'll start, and Tyler's gonna drive it. So, and if we have any technical difficulties, we'll try to reassess as we go along. Well, for some reason, one of us was cutting out during this, so hopefully it'll all be good. But yes, thank you for the introduction, and we're really thrilled to tell you a little bit about this discovery. And to start, I really want to give some context for why this is important. So, Tyler, if I could have the first slide. Okay, so this graph here is of the diversity of life. It really shows the diversity of life from the bloom of multicellular life, the Cambrian explosion about 550 million years ago, to the present day. And so time is along the bottom, 600 million on the left, present day on the right. And then on the vertical column, or the vertical axis, the y-axis, you get the number of families. And that's just, you know, one way to divide diversity. So this is the number of families of marine life, primarily, over the last 600 million years. And you can see from left to right, there's a general upward trend. But what's interesting, well, and the other thing to notice here is there's 3 different colors, and we kind of color code these different stages in Earth's, the history of life on Earth, the Cambrian fauna, the Paleozoic fauna, and then more of the modern fauna. But what's really important to sort of understand from this graph is that sawtooth pattern. And what that's showing you is the 5 great mass extinctions in Earth's history. And life is really shaped by these. So the biggest one was 250 million years ago, the end Permian extinction. But there's one major one after that. Well, actually, there's 2. There's the end Triassic, but the most recent one is at the end of the Cretaceous. We call it the end Cretaceous extinction, and it heralds the end of the dinosaurs. So when you think about an extinction, extinctions are final, right? I mean, when something goes extinct, that is it. It does not come back. And obviously, that's usually what we think of as an extinction. But it also has a couple of other facets to these events. So if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, you can sort of see of that branching tree there. And the branching tree, you can sort of think of as like a tree of life. But it could be any number of groups of animals, could be dinosaurs, could be mammals, could be plants. And that branching tree of life, that diversity, butts up against that extinction event, that red line in this case, and it trims that tree. So a lot of the branches don't make it through. They die at that extinction. Of course, that's extinction. But of course, things make it through, and those become the organisms that diversify and repopulate the world. And this period of time after extinctions is extremely interesting because usually it's the earliest examples of the animals that we might have in our backyard. Particularly, this is true of the last great mass extinction, 66 million years ago. But this moment of diversification, there's lots of weird things happening, and often we don't have a good window into that time period. Often we just don't have the fossils that tell much of the story. But you should really think of an extinction not only as the moment of extinction, but also a period of origins and a filter for what made it and what didn't make it. So just to put a finer point on that, everything that you see outside today, everything that you see outside your window today, from the plants to the animals, the birds, the fish, the insects, the lizards, the mammals, and so on and so forth, everything had to have an ancestor that survived the last great mass extinction 66 million years ago. So the plants and animals that you see outside are shaped by that last great mass extinction. So what happened? Well, there's a couple of ideas out there. We typically ascribe to this idea that we were hit by a giant asteroid. We know that's true at this moment. We have the crater. There's a layer of dust and molten rock fragments the world over at this time period. And so that's one big idea. And the idea is essentially this, that we get hit by this asteroid moving at something like 150,000 miles an hour. It was coming in very steeply and blasted a hole in the Earth up to about 150 to 180 miles across. Estimates are still sort of sketchy on that because it's under the ocean at the moment, mostly. And that hole is about 20 miles deep. And in that moment, it sent a shockwave and firestorm from Mexico to Alaska in about 5 minutes. So here in Colorado, we would have had about 2 minutes before that shockwave hit us with an associated firestorm. And there's all these remarkable consequences of this event. There's the material that's blasted out dims the sun. We probably had a prolonged nuclear winter, among a number of other effects, probably the worst of which was when material, most of the rock came raining back to the surface of the Earth, it melted. And this happened probably a day after the impact, at least that's what we think from modeling exercises. So imagine you survive the impact. We're here in Colorado, maybe you're in a valley or something like that. The shockwave and firestorm goes over your head. There are earthquakes and there are tsunamis further south, all through Texas, and just an incredible moment of destruction. And you're happy you've survived this event, but a day later, the material starts to rain back to the surface of the Earth, and it superheats the atmosphere to several hundred degrees Celsius. We call it the thermal pulse. And everywhere we look and have the boundary preserved, we have a bunch of little beads of glass. But it turns out that that's not the only bad thing that was happening on Earth then. And so this is where the debate comes in, where what killed the dinosaurs. So you can see over on the left-hand side, the impact crater location in Mexico. At the same time, India, in a plate tectonic sense, was rocketing northward towards Asia. And there are massive flood basalts. It's this second largest flood basalts on land. And these seem to have been really altering the atmosphere in a variety of ways. So there's sort of a little bit of a tug of war still happening between the meteorite folks and the flood basalt folks. But Tyler and I aren't so worried about that, though we definitely fall in the meteorite camp. Here in North America, it's pretty clear that we see an instantaneous extinction associated with the impact. But these flood basalts are pretty remarkable and they're worth mentioning. So here's a map of them in India, and they're really well exposed. There's a huge central plateau. And you go to the edge of that plateau and it's incised with river valleys. It's called the Western Ghats, and it's a mountain range. And this is what it looks like. And you can just see layer after layer of basalt flows. Really, really remarkable. And they seem to have been erupted quite quickly. So these two things together, regardless of which camp you're in, certainly lead to the extinction of the dinosaurs. We know the dinosaurs go extinct, and they were this ultra dominant group of animals. They reigned the Earth for nearly 200 million years. They occupied every ecosystem or on every continent. There are thousands upon thousands of species. And mammals, of course, lived alongside them, but we never got bigger than about a house cat during that time. But with the extinction of the dinosaurs, many, many, many mammals also went extinct, but a few made it through. And they were around to repopulate the planet. So just to give you another example of that, this is actually Tyler's backyard in North Dakota. He's actually in North Dakota right now. And all those ghostly figures there are all the dinosaurs below the KT boundary, below that extinction horizon. And he's got teams of volunteers digging up those dinosaurs. But the point being, this is from a NOVA special a number of years ago, that that line marks the end of the time of the dinosaurs. And nowhere on Earth has anyone found an articulated dinosaur above that line. And in fact, there are very few fossils above that line. We find sometimes lots of plant fossils, but usually the vertebrates are restricted to just little teeth and things like that. So I'm going to just sort of orient us here in the world. And of course, we all know and love Colorado as Coloradans. Right here in this sort of shaded map of the Western US. And now we're going to zoom into Colorado, and we have Denver and Colorado Springs. And what Tyler's overlaid there is the geology of our area on the Front Range. And what's nice is that the mountains were coming up at just the right time to form a basin and capture a couple of million years before and a couple of million years after the KT boundary. So we sort of have a tape recorder, and this is true actually through most of the American West, but we sort of have a tape recorder of this event. And so Tyler and I Tyler moved to Denver about 5 or 6 years ago, and I've been at the museum for about 15 years. And my specialty is plants and his is vertebrates. We had both worked in the Cretaceous and had both spent time in the Paleocene as well. And we sort of got together thinking about what could we do to make an impact on our field and figure out a project to work on together. And so we really settled on this idea of recovery from the world's last mass extinction. And yet we had this problem, and other people had tried this before. There's just this unbelievable dearth of fossils, just a lack of fossils after the boundary in the first in about the first million years. So every fossil that had been found was sort of treasured, if you will, particularly vertebrate fossils, because they offered so much information about this incredible event and then the recovery, the subsequent recovery. So we thought we would end up having to travel to South America or Asia to say something about this, to find the rocks that preserve the fossils. Because even though we had the fossils here in North America, even though we had the rocks of the right age here in North America, we hadn't found many fossils of the right age. But to start, before you hop on a plane and go to all those remote places, you should always double check your backyard. And so this is the section of rocks down in Colorado Springs. It's the edge of the southern edge of the Denver Basin. That's Pikes Peak in the distance. And those outcrops record about 1 million years of time just after the KT boundary. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Tyler for him to pick up the story in this place called Corral Bluffs, just east of Colorado Springs.
All right. Well, thanks, Ian. Hopefully my internet doesn't give out. Ian said I'm here in North Dakota, and I'm just hoping the internet stays strong here. So be on standby there, Ian. So like Ian said, we were both really interested in this question of what happened after this mass extinction. This was a huge, huge unanswered question. There'd been a lot of work that had gone into understanding what caused the extinction of the dinosaurs, but we knew so little about what went on afterwards. And so that's what led us down here. And of course, this area is not new. Corral Bluffs, it's been an area that's been explored for at least 140 years or so. Here's a picture from Roland Brown, who's at with the Smithsonian. And he and his crews were out here in the 1930s and 40s, and they found lots of fossils from this area. But the area wasn't that big, and the fossils weren't that abundant, and they were also highly fragmentary. So they moved on. They went in, to greener pastures. They went further south, mainly to the San Juan Basin down in New Mexico. But like Ian said, we wanted to check our backyard to see, what we could find. We just knew that if we could find fossils from this interval of time, that we would have a really big discovery. And so like Ian said, before we go and fly all over the world, we needed to check our own backyard. And so that's exactly what we did. We went down to Corral Bluffs, and, we spent about a week out there, and I remember being completely underwhelmed. We just weren't finding a whole lot of fossils. Here in my hand, I'm holding a few mammal fossils, mammal jaws that you might be able to see the teeth sticking out here. Then here's the lower part of the jaw, teeth here and lower part of the jaw. This was actually a pretty good find from this interval of time. Prior to this discovery that I'm going to tell you about here in a minute, I could count on one hand how many mammal jaws I'd found from this interval of time. But even so, we find a few mammals, and I just kept on thinking, like, God, there's just not a lot here, but they have to be here. They have to be here. We had a couple of clues that suggested that these more complete mammals might be present. I had that floating in my head, and I also had this idea, this other search image of how to find fossils from some of my fossil finding experiences in South Africa. And there, they find fossils not by searching for the bone, like what I have here in my hand, but rather they search for concretions. And you're gonna hear more about concretions in a minute. And then in the concretions are where the fossils are. And so figured, well, why not give it a shot? I'm not really finding many fossils here the way we're doing it right now. So I pick up a concretion, this white, blob, this sort of nondescript looking rock, and I cracked it open. And there, looking back at me was a complete mammal skull. I had just cracked open the mammal skull, sort of a cross-sectional cut through the skull. So the brain is right in here. There's a tooth here and a tooth over here. Really difficult to see. But this was absolutely amazing. I'd been looking for 25 years for fossils from this interval of time. And in that exact moment, I had just broken open the most complete mammal skull that I had ever seen from this interval of time. So it was an amazing moment. I called Ian over. He came over. We had another volunteer with us, Sharon Melito. We were celebrating. And they left, and within a matter of minutes, they came back carrying mammal skulls, because now they had the search image and they knew what to look for. And we knew right then and there that we had made it big, that we had found a big discovery, because we realized that the fossils were sort of hiding in plain sight, if you will. They were hiding inside of these concretions. So here's a concretion, here's the mammal skull that was inside. And a concretion is just a type of rock that forms around an organic nucleus. So think of like a pearl in an oyster shell. So here's the pearl. If you're really lucky, that pearl will be a mammal skull, right? That organic nucleus will be a mammal or a vertebrate fossil. Not always like that. There are a lot of times the organic nucleus is just bacteria. But suffice to say, this new search image completely changed our ability to find fossils from this interval of time. And so since then, we made this discovery in 2016. We've gone back and collected hundreds of these concretions, and we're slowly getting them prepared. Here's a time lapse showing the work going from concretion to a beautiful fossil inside. And in this case, it's a crocodile skull. Here's another concretion, and you can see the prep, over the course of several weeks. It takes anywhere from 50 hours to a couple hundred hours to clean these fossils. But in this case, it turns out to be this brand new species of turtle that Ian and I are currently working on. So one by one, these sort of, again, ugly, nondescript looking concretions revealed these beautiful fossils inside. Whole mammal skulls, whole turtle shells, whole crocodile skulls. In some cases, we have entire skeletons from this interval of time, of these animals. And we've collected hundreds of these concretions since 2016. And we are slowly getting them all prepared. We've really just scratched the surface. And I just love showing this picture. I mean, this is just a small subset of the fossils. But just in this one picture, we have brand new species of mammals, turtles, and crocodiles. And in every case, if the animal is known, we have the most complete specimen of that species. So we're going to learn a lot about the anatomy and who these animals are related to. And so with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Ian.
All right, thanks, Tyler. So one of the things that's sort of remarkable about this is, so again, just imagine this period of time in which we didn't have any data, and yet scientists dreamt of having a data set from this moment to understand how life bounced back from Earth's last great mass extinction, particularly the mammals, and how we sort of got our start. So with this discovery, we built a team, and it always takes a team. This is just a subset of our team in this case, but it really takes a team to figure out all the different aspects of this work. And it goes so far beyond just finding the fossils and describing, in our cases, the vertebrates and the plants. All right. So I'm the fossil plant guy, and there's actually about 5 of us, 5 fossil plant people. That's like half of all the fossil plant people in the world in this project at this point. And on the left, you can see a bunch of impressions of fossil leaves. Some of the sort of fishtail looking like ones are palm fronds. But those leaves give us a really interesting window into the forests that grew there. So we can see the forest through their leaves, but another way we can see the forest is through the fossil pollen. And what you're looking at there are 3 panels of fossil pollen. What you do is you take a chunk of rock, something like this, about the size of a thimble, you dissolve it in very powerful hydrofluoric acid, screen out all this microscopic pollen, re-dye it. You dye it red so you can see it easily, and then you put it on microscope slides. And what you're looking at is the forest through the pollen. And of course, we've all probably got some kind of fall allergies going on these days. Certainly we do over here in Denver. And that's what you're breathing. And it's getting in there and irritating your nose and lungs. But we can look back and see the forest through the pollen as well. So in the Cretaceous, in the bottom panel, you see a bunch of a variety of shapes with little tiny Ks by them for Cretaceous. And then right after the extinction, so the next panel up is just above the asteroid impact. And the first thing that comes back is all ferns. And above that, we have a mix of new types of pollen. So you can see the shapes are different from the shapes down below. And it's a new forest at the top. In the top panel. But this combination of looking at the leaves and looking at the pollen gives us real insight into the forests at this time. So Tyler talked a little bit about prep, and I'm going to show you another example of prep here as this specimen comes out, a very nice skull of a mammal. And this project was incredibly challenging in that it was extraordinarily difficult to extract the fossils from the concretions. It takes a very practiced hand, and there's actually only a few preparators that can do it, and they're sort of scattered around the country. So we have to send these fossils out in these concretions and then come back as a prepared skull. But for the longest time, there's been a major advent in paleontology, and that is to peer inside the fossils. So Tyler talks a little bit about the anatomy and that kind of stuff. And the way we get at that is by X-raying them. And in particular, we CT scan them. So it's really thousands of X-rays stacked together. And here's Tyler on the left at the Wheat Ridge Animal Hospital. That's one of the vet clinics here in Denver at about 11 p.m. on a Friday night. And so they let us use their fancy CT scanner at night. And then we bring that data back to we have a lab that allows us to look or to collate that data to see it in 3 dimensions. But it lets us look inside the specimens, a whole new window into this world. So here's a partial mammal skull. So you can see on the left-hand side, it's the back of the head. And on the front, there should be a nose, but it's broken off. The top and the bottom are the arches above the eyeballs. And it's just a chunk of bone. But what's remarkable is that in this CT data, we've grayed out the bone on top, and what's in the teal color is the brain cavity. And to the left and right of that, towards the back, are those little purple loops. Those are the ears, the inner ears of this animal. So if we go to the next slide, we can do a number of fun sort of estimates of what this animal was like based on its brain, its shape of its brain, and the shape and orientation of its ears. So the brain suggests that it's not a particularly intelligent animal, has a very low encephalization quotient. It has a low agility score, again, based on the ears in this case, the orientation of the ears. This thing was slow moving, probably lived on the ground. So you can already tell, like, you know, in a post-dinosaur world, don't have to be that smart, don't have to move that fast. But one thing it does have, and that's toward the front of the brain, are these massive olfactory bulbs, suggesting an incredible sense of smell. So you can start to get a sense of what these animals were like and what they're doing on that landscape in these forests just after the extinction of the dinosaurs. So, and I think, okay, and I have one more fun sort of story to relate. So this whole project is about discovery, and you know, Tyler gave you a great idea of what that discovery felt like, and you know, and why people just hadn't seen it before. And certainly the vertebrates lead this discovery, and yet there are all kinds of other fossils there. There's tons of plant fossils of all varieties that help us sort of, for lack of a better term, flesh out this story. but there have been a couple of incredible discoveries in the plants as well. So in regard to the vertebrates, we were, as Tyler will show you in a bit, something about how these vertebrates evolved over time and what was driving them. And we were having a discussion for quite some time about what kinds of foods they might be eating. And we knew from other scientific studies that there was an inference that legumes should be around at this time, but nobody had found fossils of that kind. And so Tyler sort of was challenging us, what would it take to find a legume? You know, can you just tell by the little tiny leaves and things like that? And we're like, no, I can't do that. You need to find a full-blown legume pod. And we had a film crew following us this entire project, and there's a wonderful Nova special on this discovery. And we also take a series of teams out to the field. So Jen was talking about, of course, all the wonderful programs that that you guys run at the EUREKA Museum, but we do similar kinds of things. And in this case, we do it with high school teens, and we pay them for the summer to work alongside us. And this young student, this is Aeon Way Smith, and she was 14 in this case, and she'd been listening over a few days keenly to us talking about this. And so I was in a quarry digging fossil leaves, and she was in there with me, and I was doing interviews, and she found this incredible fossil, and she was trying to get my attention, and I looked over my shoulder, and it just looked like a stick. I was like, oh, it's a stick. And she's like, no, you should look at it again. And it just caught the light just right, and it was a bean pod. And there's a bean pod over there on the right. And this is the earliest bean pods in the fossil record. So maybe if we go to the next slide. We now have quite a few examples of these. Hopefully, oh, there's Tyler. So here's another example of that bean pod on the left, and actually some of the little tiny leaves that go alongside it. And then here's an artist's reconstruction. So beans are the third most speciose group of plants on the planet today. There are 20,000 species of them. We think of them mostly as snow peas and green beans and things like that, or maybe protein for your protein shake in the morning or something. But in the tropics, there's more than 10,000 species of legume trees. And they're incredibly important, not only as a food source to humanity, but for all vertebrate life throughout the world. And on top of that, we didn't really know where their origins were. We had actually thought they might be in South America. And in fact, the oldest fossils have been found there. And with really just a swing of her hammer, Aeon had like taken the legume family tree and taken it from South America and put it in North America and discovered the world's oldest beans right outside the city of Colorado Springs. Really, really remarkable. So I'm going to hand it back to Tyler after this, but just to sort of pull this together a little bit, one of the things that's remarkable about this discovery is that, you know, you've heard us talk about the different fossil data sets and that kind of thing. And when we as paleontologists go to a pile of rocks and work on it and amass data sets of fossils and that kind of thing, we're excited to have one or two of these sort of points of the triangle. We call it the trifecta of paleontology. So you might be able to tell time in those rocks, which is not always that easy. Sometimes you don't have the right kind of datable rock material to figure out time. Sometimes you have time in plants, or you have time in vertebrates, or maybe you have animals and vertebrates. Sometimes that happens, but you can't tell what the age of the rock is. And so, or very precisely, you might be able to generally, but not precisely. This site and a number of other ones in the rock record had all three. And if you have all three anywhere on Earth at any time, you're excited. If you go to one spot, you can find vertebrates, you can find plants, and you can tell exactly the age of those rocks. That's really important and really critical. So we had all of this at the right time. So this moment that was sort of shrouded in mystery, where we didn't really know what was going on in that first sort of million years after the extinction of the dinosaurs, there at Corral Bluffs, we had all three. We had the vertebrates, the plants, and the ability to tell time from the rocks. So with that, I'm going to hand it to Tyler to sort of bring us home here at the end of the presentation.
All right. Well, thanks a lot, Ian. I just love that story of Aeon's legume. I mean, this whole story is all about discovery, and there's just so many great moments like that. But Aeon's legume discovery is certainly my favorite. So now we have all of these amazing fossils. Like, what can it tell us? We were able to find the plants and the animals. Now what can we do with it? Now this was our big moment. So this is what we knew before, right? We knew that we had the age of the dinosaurs down here, age of the mammals up here. The extinction of the dinosaurs was caused by this giant asteroid, and Ian told that that amazing story of the day that asteroid struck, the single worst day for life on Earth. But this is what we knew afterwards. It's sort of a blank slate. We didn't know a lot about what happened afterwards. So here was our moment. And of course, this took a lot of different scientists. So Ian and I get to tell this story, but there were 16 papers on 16 scientists on the initial discovery paper. And one of the key scientists was Ken Weissenberger. And Ken is a stratigrapher. And one of the first things that we needed to do was map out all of the rocks. And that's what Ken did. Laid out all of the rocks and then placed all of our fossils within those rocks. And an incredible amount of work to do that. And then we needed to date those rocks. So along with Ken's work, we had a graduate student, Anthony Fontes, as well as his advisor, Will Clyde. And they use a technique where they looked at the paleomagnetics of the rock to help determine the age of those rocks. And with their work, we were able to determine that we had the first 1 million years after the mass extinction. So we dubbed this, year zero, because this giant asteroid here is the biologic reset button. Again, the single worst day for life on Earth. It completely changes the course of life. And so we had the first 1 million years. Then the next thing, of course, we had all of these amazing vertebrate fossils. And there's a lot that you can do when you go from having only teeth and fragmentary jaws to whole skulls. And Ian talked a little bit about what we can do, like CT scan their skulls, look at their brains, their olfactory bulbs, their, all of the anatomy inside of their head. But one of the easiest things you can do is just track body size. How big did mammals get, during this interval, and how quickly did they achieve that body mass? Body mass is so incredibly important in all aspects of an animal's ecology. It determines where it can live, largely what it will be eating. So this is the first thing that we wanted to do, was just simply track body size. And we did that, using a number of techniques, but we saw this interesting trend for maximum body mass here. So down here you can see mammals were about the size of a raccoon. So generally really quite small. And those are the largest mammals. Most of the mammals during this interval of time were actually much, much smaller. Then you can see, of course, not surprisingly, a big dip in body mass when the asteroid struck. And then we see two big jumps in body size at 300,000 years after the impact and at 700,000 years after the impact. So this is where I was really pushing Ian and the team of paleobotanists to really tell me what was going on with the plants in the forest, because I had thought that these big jumps in body size were likely due to changes in the forest ecology. So that's where Ian and his team got busy. They went out and collected thousands of plants from many different localities. We had a couple of paleobotanists palynologists, who looked at the pollen, and Ian talked a little bit about that. But one of the key palynologists was our colleague Antoine Bercovici, and he counted over 100,000 pollen grains for this particular study. Spent about 6 months underneath or at the microscope looking at identifying and counting these pollen grains. And the reason he was doing that was to really help paint paint a picture of what the ecosystem looked like through this first million years. And one of the things that he noticed was that right after the mass extinction, there was a proliferation of fern pollen. So down here we have percentage, and here the percentage of pollen on the little pollen slide, and you can see that in the Cretaceous there's not a lot of fern pollen, but right after that mass extinction there is what we call the fern spike, and this is something that people have documented around the world. And that's because ferns are these pioneering plants. They're the first things that come back after a natural disaster, like, Mount St. Helens erupted. The ferns were the first things that came back. The next thing that came back, and this was Antoine's work as well, was a proliferation of palms. So a huge abundance of palms. On some of these slides, you can see there was up to 90% of the pollen on that slide was made up of palm. So we've dubbed these the fern world and the palm world. And we also found lots and lots of fossil palms as well, like Ian mentioned. Here's a big palm frond. Here are palm flowers. We found lots of the tree stumps of palm trees. And then this is what the palm pollen looks like. And then using pollen, we were also able to see a proliferation of a really important plant group, and that is the walnut family, which includes pecans. And so we dubbed this the pecan pie world, because at this exact moment when the walnut family starts to diversify, and this is just a picture of what those pollen grains look like, we see the first big jump in body size. So we've hypothesized that some of these early mammals, which were plant eaters, or they're herbivorous, were likely eating some of these new food sources being provided on the landscape. And then the next big important jump was Aeon's legume. And that legume was found at 700,000 years after the mass extinction, in the exact same moment when we get this big jump in body size right here. And so, of course, legumes are rich in protein, and we dubbed this the protein bar world. Using the palm and the plants and the animals, we were able to create sort of these 5 different worlds to show, sort of these visual hypotheses of how the world changed across the the KT boundary, as well as through the first million years here. And then one of the last things that Ian and his team were able to do was use the plant record to infer temperature. There is a close correlation between the number of plants on the landscape that have a toothed margin like this versus a smooth margin like this. And so it correlates very well in modern ecosystems, which makes it a very, very powerful tool for inferring ancient ecosystems. The temperature in these ancient ecosystems. And we found that there were 3 distinct warming intervals after the mass extinction. One that lasted for about 100,000 years immediately after the mass extinction. One that correlates with the diversification of the walnut family or the pecan pie world, and also correlates with the appearance of these larger mammals. And then this last warming interval up here, which correlates with the appearance of legumes, as well as the appearance of these much larger mammals. So, we kind of had it all here. We had the ability to tell time, we had the plants, the animals, and then we also were able to infer temperature to tell, I think, this nice cohesive story of how the changing climate was influencing the forest ecosystem. And of course, the changing forest ecosystem were having a major impact on the evolution of these early mammals, particularly in their overall size. So now we'll just quickly walk through each of these worlds. And I always like to think of these illustrations or these reconstructions as visual hypotheses, because so much work goes into reconstructing these illustrations that I'm going to show you. Many scientists have thoroughly vetted them. And so here we go. This is what Colorado would have looked like right before the giant asteroid struck off the Yucatan Peninsula. You would have had lots of feathered dinosaurs, Lots of other smaller dinosaurs. Here's T-Rex. And then bam, the single worst day for life on Earth. The giant asteroid strikes, completely wipes out the dinosaurs, as well as 75% of species on Earth. Some things survive. And so these are the earliest survivors of the mass extinction. This is what Colorado would have looked like. You had the Rocky Mountains that were starting to uplift then. And then the largest animals to survive the mass extinction. Here's the largest mammal down here. And you can see it's a half a kilogram, or about the size of a rat. So quite small. But that is the largest mammal that survived this mass extinction. And then next to it, I've put the largest animal here in North America that survived the mass extinction. And that's this big soft-shell turtle that weighed several hundred pounds. And then, the forests start to come back in terms of diversity, but they're still very, very low in diversity. They're dominated by all these palms. So this is this palm-dominated ecosystem that lasts for up to 300,000 years after the mass extinction. But in this palm-dominated ecosystem, mammals start to come back as well in terms of both diversity as well as body size. So this mammal right here is about the size of a raccoon. It appears on the landscape 100,000 years after the mass extinction. So within 100,000 years after the mass extinction, you have an animal that's just about as big as the mammals before the mass extinction. And then at 300,000 years, we have the diversification of the forests. The main group that's coming back are the walnut family, or these are some of the flowers here, as well as some of the leaves. So we've dubbed this the pecan pie world, because in that exact same moment, we have mammals here that are 30 times larger than the mammals that survived the mass extinction. These mammals here are larger than at any point during the reign of the dinosaurs, which was for about 180 million years. So within 300,000 years, mammals are starting to really come back in both diversity as well as body size. And then we have, at 700,000 years, the forests are continuing to diversify and recover. And one of the main groups that appears on the landscape at this point are the legumes. And then again, in that exact moment, we have mammals that appear that are likely eating these legumes. And so here we have this bizarre mammal called Taeniolabus chewing on one of these legumes. And in this interval, these mammals here they're about the size of a small wolf, and they're 100 times larger than the mammals that survive the mass extinction. The rats-sized mammals that survived the mass extinction. So suffice to say that Ian and I were incredibly excited about this discovery. We published this paper along with 14 other scientists in a scientific journal called Science, which is one of the best scientific journals out there. We are very fortunate to partner up with the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, and they came out and filmed. We're basically filming this discovery from the moment we made it in 2016, and they followed us for 3 years, and they did an amazing job telling the story of discovery. And then they put together this 1-hour documentary that was aired on PBS Nova. And if you haven't watched it, and obviously I'm quite biased, but I would highly recommend watching it. And you can watch it for free online right now by just going to pbs.org. And then we also worked with museum professionals at our own museum, the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, to put together this really cool exhibit called After the Asteroid, Earth's Comeback Story. And it's just, it was really incredible to be able to do these 3 things. When you talk about the trifecta of paleo, this is another one, to publish it in a big journal, have a documentary come out in the same week, and open the doors to an exhibit. So if you're in the Denver area, this exhibit is now open and free with admission. And I'd also encourage you guys, everybody, to check out this website where you can go online and get a lot. All the illustrations that I showed are available for free online. There's podcasts and other things if you'd like to learn more about this discovery. All here. You can see the link, coloradosprings.dmns.org. And so I think with that, I'd like to end by playing a just over 1 minute clip, sort of a highlight reel of this NOVA special. And I think they really just captures the sense of, the excitement of discovery quite well.
It's a really bad time for life on Earth.
I mean, you could go your entire career and not find a skull from this time period. That's how rare they are.
They're excruciatingly hard to find.
There's just nothing like picking up something and finding out it's something amazing.
It was crazy the way it happened.
Bam, we hit it big. I just found a mammal skull.
It was like opening a door into a new world.
We want to build up a picture of how life evolved at this period.
Some things survive, right? Including some of our earliest ancestors.
Over the last 66 million years, mammals evolved an incredible diversity of forms.
That moment of rapid mammal evolution is effectively the trigger to our existence here on planet Earth.
All right. Well, thank you for tuning in. And I think if there's time, we'd be happy to entertain any questions you might have.